Morning. I've been watching, the videos just to see, make sure everything's okay. The last time I watched, or the last one that I watched, it's froze in the middle of it, so I was able to let Mike know about that, and he uploaded it again. But I also get routinely humbled whenever I watch it by some mistake that I make. I misspelled one of my terms 2 weeks ago, teleological, and it's not that I don't know how to spell it, but I was in the middle of it and I got lost in it. I didn't know where I was at, so I threw a letter in a place it didn't belong. But it's, let's see if I can do it right this time. T-E-L-E-O-L-O, not I, L-O-G-I-C-A-L, teleological, which is the second common argument for the existence of God, the argument from design, coming from the Greek word telos, that means end or purpose. And that is that the universe has the appearance of being purpose-driven. It's a purpose-driven universe. And things seem to have a design. So that was one thing. And but last week, I realized I finished the argument for the atheism, showing that it has three substantial problems, which means that atheism or materialism do not commend themselves for belief because they do not cohere with reality. They are incoherent in that it is self-contradictory, and also in that it doesn't fit the world as we find it or human nature as we find it. You can't live consistently with atheism. I think that is really the strongest point. I've made 2 points that I think are extremely strong when you're dealing with atheism. And the first one is that it is not something that can be proven scientifically. Those who think that it can are begging the question. They're assuming what they first need to prove. So one of the things that I've imparted to you that I think is most important is to understand that when you're dealing with world views, you're dealing with metaphysical realities. Metaphysical means beyond the physical. So when you get into this realm and you're talking about the meaning of life, or what way of viewing and understanding the universe and life, and whatever may lie beyond the universe is true, you can't assume that that can be scientifically proven, because that would only be the case if materialism were true. But that's the very question you're trying to determine. And so you can't rule out the possibility that the universe has a non-material origin right at the beginning. Therefore, you can't use science as your means for determining it. And if you were to attempt, and there are plenty of people who do attempt to explain the origin of the universe through science, well, I have bad news for you. You're not going to succeed at that anyway. Nobody has been able to do that, and I would argue it never will be done, because you're stepping outside of the realm of the science when you get into the origin of the universe. So that's the number one thing about atheism, is that you can't approach it from a scientific standpoint. So you have to approach it from a logical standpoint in terms of consistency or coherence. And when you approach it that way, I gave you 3 different reasons why it's incoherent. One is it can't account for the origin of the universe because the universe is temporal. Therefore, there had to be something beyond the universe to explain the universe. Number 2 is the argument from design. And I circumvented the whole argument from evolution, though I believe it can be satisfactorily answered, and we'll deal with it later in this class. But we went before natural selection could be an explanation for the design in the universe, and saw that the universe itself, the physical universe, is fine-tuned for life, and that didn't happen through natural selection. And we also saw that the single-cell organism that had to be the beginning of life is too complex to have happened by random chance, and that cannot be attributed to natural selection either. And so you have a problem on that level. But the most compelling, and this is like what I'm saying, the second really compelling argument against, or the second really important point that I'm leaving you with, and I want to make sure you retain, because to me this is the coup de grace in terms of ultimately defeating atheism, is you can't live consistently by it. You have to, because it contradicts our very nature. Our very nature is that we are moral beings and rational beings, and we need to live as if certain things are absolutely true, and you can't escape that. Even people who say there is no absolute truth are making a statement about truth that is absolute. So it's the very fabric and nature of the universe that truth is absolute, and that there are morals. People who say there are no morals then set up a criteria that it's good. People who are tolerant and don't try to impose their beliefs on others or their values on others, those are the good people, you see. And you're just as vehemently condemned if you believe in absolute morals as someone who does believe in absolute morals would condemn people who are without morals or who deny morals. In other words, there's just as much dogmatism on the part of the tolerant, politically correct, liberal people against people who have absolute beliefs as there is among the people who have absolute beliefs themselves. Why? Because everybody has absolute beliefs. That's the construction of the universe. That's the construction of human nature. You can't escape it. And so people who attempt to do that can't. And actually, the basic morals of the Ten Commandments that God gave by revelation, and that in that revelation he also states in Romans chapter 2 is written on the human heart and in the conscience. Well, it just turns out that these are just self-evident moral truths that people can't deny. And I gave an illustration of how if I were to steal someone's BlackBerry and justified it, that they would feel violated even if they are a moral relativist. And what that shows is even if you're an atheist and you deny the existence of an absolute God who establishes absolute morals, you still live in a universe in which those things are true, and you can't live consistently as if they're not true. So you have to live a lot of your life as though God existed, even though you deny his existence. So if you go back to the fact that we're testing worldviews by their coherence, and that's the only way that you can test worldviews, then atheism fails the test. Okay, so we have seen that atheism or materialism fails the logical test. We've also seen previously that polytheism, the belief in many gods, fails the logical test. So that leaves us now at the third worldview we're going to look at, which is the worldview of pantheism. And we're going to apply the same test to that. And because pantheism is also in the larger category of naturalism, it has a lot of the same critiques that atheism does. As you look at your outline, you can see two of them are identical to the problems that atheism or materialism has. And that is, it has trouble explaining the origin of the universe, and C, it has trouble explaining the phenomenon of humanity in the universe. And the only one that is different is, instead of having a problem as atheism does explaining the design in the universe, pantheism has the problem of explaining the multiplicity within the universe. So we're going to try to move through these as quickly as I can at this point. We got a late start, and I would love to get through this today, but I may not be able to within the less than a half hour that I have, but I will give it a shot. Pantheism is a significant worldview in our culture. It's not sort of a minor player. It is a dominant, it is one of three worldviews that I have assessed are competing for dominance in Western culture. Although we're looking at six worldviews, I would say that three of them, not polytheism, not panentheism, which I've defined before and I will define again, so if you don't know what that means, don't worry about it, and not deism, which is the belief that God started the world and has had nothing to do with it since. Okay, those three worldviews are more minor players in the competition for cultural dominance. But the three that really, when you see the culture wars going on, you have pantheism, materialism, or atheism, and theism are the major competitors for people's allegiance and for their faith. So pantheism is a major player. I want to just, give you a little bit of history about pantheism. It first appeared on the world scene in about the 8th century BC in India. Hinduism, it had existed prior to that, but it was more polytheistic, and it was based on the caste structure within India, where the Aryans, who were invaders that came into the Indus Valley and conquered the Dravidians. You don't have to write these terms down, but they conquered the Dravidians, who were the native indigenous people in that area, and sort of blended with them. And that's why you have different castes, because the more purely Aryan you would be, the higher caste you would be. Thus the lighter skin. The Dravidians were black-skinned people or dark-skinned people, brown-skinned people. So it was, the priesthood caste was the Brahmins, which was the highest caste. And so the religion was very ritualistic and polytheistic. And something began to develop, though. You have the Vedas, which are the original scriptures of India, of Hinduism, which is based on, the Indus Valley, Hinduism. And toward the end of the process of the compilation of the Vedas, you have the Upanishads, which is the final collection of works. And in the Upanishads, they began to develop a philosophy. It was a more sophisticated approach to religion. And this is where pantheism first occurs. And then it is developed even more fully in around the 8th century AD by a philosopher by the name of Shankara. And he developed what's known as the Advaita Vedanta, which is a strict, unqualified monism, all is one. Simultaneous, not simultaneous, but in another part of the world, possibly independent or possibly through trade, there was some picking up of these ideas by Greece and bringing it back, when they were trading with India. But in the time prior to Christ, in Greek philosophy, you have a development of pantheism. The Stoics that Paul mentions in Acts chapter 17 were pantheists, and they had a belief system fairly similar to Hinduism. And then in the time after Christ, you had the development of Neoplatonism, which is very similar to Hinduism. It even has reincarnation and other beliefs. So you have that as a historical development. And then at different points in history, you have pantheistic philosophers. You have, for example, Spinoza was a pantheist. He's a very famous philosopher. And you have pantheism showing up in different movements. The American Transcendentalist movement with Ralph Waldo Emerson was, and Henry David Thoreau, was also a pantheistic philosophy. And in terms of world religions, Buddhism is not so much concerned about God, but it is very compatible with pantheism, and some schools of Buddhism completely go into that realm, such as Zen Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. They're very comparable to Hinduism, to the school of Hinduism that promoted pantheism. And so in Western culture, then, you also have pantheism. Taoism is another. Taoism is pantheistic. That's a Chinese religion that's apparently developed without any influence from India. Lao Tzu was the founder of Taoism, and he also described God as sort of beyond any kind of description. It's something that you just have to experience. And then in the Western culture, you have pantheism showing up in a lot of different religious sects and movements. It shows up in the New Thought movement of the 19th century, where it's believed that all is mind and all is God and all is good, and therefore all of our problems result from negative thinking, and so we need to learn to think positively and only affirm the existence of that which is good and that which is God. And in the New Thought movement, you have the Unity School of Christianity, you have religious science, and Christian Science is a more exclusivistic offshoot of that, going back toward the beginning, but not Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, didn't originate these New Thought ideas. They had previously been developed by a man by the name of Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. And so she took his ideas and developed a more exclusive thing, where this whole idea of Christian Science is this mental belief in affirmation of only that which is good, and that through denying the existence of sickness you can be healed. And methods for doing that, well, they were not a part of the larger New Thought movement because, they said they were the only ones that had it right. But most of the New Thought is more eclectic and will affirm the validity of other schools like that. And then you had the emergence of theosophy in the 1870s, about 1875, by a Russian woman who had emigrated to America by the name of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. And so she began to eclectically borrow beliefs from all over the world, Egypt, India, and the whole idea, it's very esoteric, which means that it's hidden, that these beliefs are beliefs that were passed down through secret societies. And so you get this whole idea that the Orthodox religions are really suppressing the people, keeping them in line, but then there's these secret societies that pass on this Gnostic belief, and even ancient Gnosticism would be compatible with pantheism because it's a mystical view. And pantheism is essentially a mystical approach to God. So they believed that this knowledge, this secret knowledge of which is basically it's symbolized by a serpent, and it's basically the idea of the divinity of the self. That's what the Gnostics affirmed, was their own divine nature. And so by incorporating teachings from all of the pantheistic or mystical traditions, theosophy sort of mixed it all together, threw evolution into the mix to make it seem like it's modern and scientific, and came up with this whole elaborate belief in a multi-tiered universe with 7 different planes. We're on the physical plane, but the next plane above this is the astral plane. You may have heard of that before. And then you have different other planes, the etheric plane, the causal plane, and so forth. And there are beings living, ascending and evolving to all these different levels. And so ultimately going back to becoming one with God. And so Blavatsky really kicked off what is now the New Age movement, because she introduced a lot of ideas that are common among the New Agers today. And so you can really trace the beginning of the New Age movement back to Blavatsky. But the New Age movement, which has been around now, you had these secret societies. You had Theosophy, the Rosicrucians, and a lot of other small little sort of fringe groups the Mighty I Am cult, and you had Alice Bailey and the Arcane School, and a lot of different people teaching this arcane secret knowledge, setting up their own modern day mystery schools and saying that they had a lineage going way back to ancient times, that this knowledge has been protected by these schools. And you had that kind of stuff on the fringe of the culture, going back to the 19th century and continuing all the way to the present. But around the 1960s, when people like myself were experimenting with psychedelic drugs and suddenly being, sticking our finger into the socket of mystical experiences and getting a jolt and then being awakened to the fact that this whole realm of experience existed. Well, that, a lot of people said, okay, I want that experience, but I don't want to have to be using drugs for the rest of my life. I want a natural high. I want something that's more disciplined. I want to follow an older tradition. So then you had this big infusion of gurus coming over in the 1970s, and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and Swami Prabhupada of the Hare Krishna movement, and many others, Muktananda. I could go on and on with names that you may or may not have heard before, but you were all aware of all these gurus and people bringing yoga over. Going back to the late 19th century, Swami Vivekananda came over to the Parliament of the World's Religions in 1893 in Chicago and established established a following, and through that then developed the Vedanta societies in different cities in America and throughout the world, which was basically taking his Ramakrishna mission from India and planning it in the West in the form of the Vedanta Society. So that was your first Hindu cult or Eastern cult in America. And that was quickly followed up by Yogananda, who established, Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote the book Autobiography of a Yogi, which is one of the most appealing introductions to Hinduism, you could imagine. Makes it sound like very holy men with great spiritual powers and insight, and tells all kinds of fantastic stories of miracles and so forth. But very appealing, very attractive, charismatic kind of personality. And he started the Self-Realization Fellowship in Los Angeles, and then that spread all over the country and the West as well. And so you have then, in the 1960s, many other yogis coming over, swamis and so forth, teaching yoga to American followings. And in the 1970s, you just had a lot of people from my generation joining various cults. And this, along with other parallel movements, you had the human potential movement of people who were seeking to realize their human potential and become more dynamic and successful. And so they gathered together in hotel ballrooms for a 3-day crash course in something called EST that was based on Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and other esoteric beliefs, or Life Spring, different kinds of human potential seminars, and the broader humanistic psychology movement of Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, Fritz Perls, and so forth, the whole third force, as it was called in psychology. All of these things were compatible with pantheism. Either like Werner Erhard, the founder of EST, specifically stated, "You are God." And he based that on a pantheistic worldview. Therefore, you create, if the human potential movement is telling you that you are the master of your own destiny, then what better thing than to say you actually create your own reality. Whatever happens in your life is of your own making. But how can you say that unless you have all power? And in pantheism, you do. Actually, you are God. And the phenomenal world, the material world, has no real objective existence. It's all created by mind. So you can really have a positive belief. You can really exercise positive thinking if you think that you can visualize an empty parking space when you drive into a parking lot and it's going to be there. And people testified, once I did LifeSpring, I was able to do that, And once I did est. And so people think that they're controlling external physical reality through their own positive thinking. Okay, and how can you do that if you're just little old you, who grew up in Jupiter, Florida, or, moved here from somewhere else, and you went to high school at X place, and you got a job at Y place, and you got 3 kids, and how do you have the power of the universe? Well, there's an answer to that. If you buy into the worldview of pantheism, you are God. And so, this is something that was also going on. So you have all these parallel movements, plus the holistic health movement. People seeking ways of becoming well or maintaining health more naturally without all the medication and so forth. And this became a powerful movement in the 1970s and basically has become at first it was a peripheral or competitive movement with mainstream medicine, but mainstream medicine saw how popular it was and basically said, if you can't beat them, join them. And so now, a lot of hospitals will have incorporate. They will let people come in and practice therapeutic touch, holding their hand over someone's head and channeling the universal life force into them to promote health, or using meditation as a way to overcome different problems. And they took transcendental meditation of the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, stripped the religious trappings out of it, and taught people how to practice that. And as a result, people are, who aren't even looking, they're not on a religious search, they're on a health search, suddenly get plugged into that same circuit of the mystical experience that does exist. And for some people, it results in a religious conversion, and so you have the holistic health movement, you have the human potential movement also being used in a lot of workplaces, required seminars you need to go through, or at least there's a lot of pressure put on you. If you want to be promoted in this company, attend this seminar, and it incorporates these ideas. These are cultural movements that were going on in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, along with those pre-existing esoteric cults that I mentioned, theosophy and so forth, and the religious gurus that had come over here. Well, all these different parallel streams converged into a rushing cultural force, a powerful river of pantheism, which is called the New Age movement, or is now called it was originally called the New Consciousness. Then it became famous as the New Age movement through Shirley MacLaine promoting it in books that she'd written, such as Out on a Limb. And then Oprah Winfrey, begins to, every New Age type person who writes a book, she would have on her show, promote it, say, this is the best thing ever. She still has been doing that with books like The Secret, and promoting these things. And so suddenly you have New Age pantheism coming into the living room of housewives across America, or women, who may record it on DVR and watch it when they get home from work, because most aren't that many housewives anymore, But in any case, Oprah, an incredible influence, one of the most some people have said she is the most influential person in America, and she's been just promoting this. I mean, we did articles on this in about 1987, 1988, when she was first promoting Shirley MacLaine, but she hasn't stopped since, And so all of this is promoting pantheism. That's why I say I've called pantheism the third cultural force. Originally it was theism, Judeo-Christianity, biblical worldview, then atheism, secular humanism, but then cosmic humanism, which is the New Age movement, a major force. And so this is why, and the thing about this is people are at different levels of understanding the worldview behind it, okay? This is where this class is going to really help you, because as I described for you pantheism, you got to realize it is the worldview behind so many things that are going on in our culture. For example, this idea of a universal life force. If you have worldview thinking, which is what this class is imparting to you, or sharpening in you if you already had it, then you can say, okay, how can that be true? How can I stand over someone and channel a universal life force into them to make them well? According to a material explanation, is there any known energy in science that they could be channeling? Well, there's electromagnetism. That's not a life force. It's not alive. And how do you channel it just by standing over someone like this, or laying on hands on them or whatever? How do you channel electricity to a point that's going to make them well? There isn't any scientific explanation for that, okay? Now, according to the biblical worldview, there is the Holy Spirit. You can pray for someone, but according to the biblical worldview, that is a supernatural activity. If God answers your prayer and heals them, it's not by any of the laws of science. It's not something that can be explained scientifically. It takes faith. It takes the Holy Spirit. Non-believers don't have access to this. You're not tapping some natural force when you're praying for somebody. So if someone believes that they're doing this, whether they have fully worked it out in their own heads or not, because a lot of people haven't, they are doing this on the basis of pantheism. Because what does pantheism state? Pantheism states that the universe is alive, and it is basically consciousness and energy. Okay, so there is a life force, which is God itself, really properly not a person, itself, but alive, and it is a force that is flowing through the universe and through the human body. So many different health modalities, many different approaches to health have been developed on the basis of this. I don't want to upset your morning here, and I'm not saying that you can't go to a chiropractor on the basis of this, but you should be discerning. The original founder of chiropractic, Palmer the name, his son is BJ, but D.D. Palmer, formulated this on the idea that there's this innate intelligence, capital I, capital I, that pervades the universe, which is a living conscious force, and it wants you to be well. It pervades your body and it promotes health. But when you get vertebral subluxations that block the flow of the innate intelligence through the body, this produces disease. So chiropractic was not just a way to deal with muscular skeletal tension and bring relief from pain. It was a whole theory of disease and health and healing, which stated that all disease results from obstructions of the innate intelligence. And they would teach this at the Palmer School of Chiropractic, but it was something you gradually were affected by. And so this is why so many chiropractors are into New Age philosophy and other forms of practices that could only be called occult. And so, but others have said, I don't buy into this innate intelligence, but chiropractic manipulation does bring results. And others would then say, yes, but it's only a temporary result. It's much better to get physical therapy, an exercise regime, or something like that. And so there's debates about that. I have my own opinions, but I'm not an authority, and I don't want to enter into that realm. But all I'm saying here is, this is just one example. Acupuncture operates theoretically according to the same idea of that there is the chi, which is a life force that pervades the universe, and through acupuncture, the chi is being released, and this will promote health. So you got to realize all of these different practices that are not ostensibly religious, or people don't get involved with them for religious reasons, but for health reasons, nonetheless are grounded in worldviews. And if you buy into these concepts of this life force, you're buying in, knowing it or not, to pantheism. Okay? And so this is where worldview, especially living in this age where we're in a pluralistic culture with competing worldviews, some people promote these therapies because of a larger agenda of converting the culture to pantheism, because they think that will, once we have enough pantheists and people practicing meditation that, is sort of like the theory back in the 60s. Let's just put LSD into the water system and everybody will become enlightened, and all of a sudden police will be handing out flowers, the Viet Cong and the American soldiers will be embracing, and it'll bring peace to the world if we can just get people to take LSD. We don't have to tell them what it is. It's this idea, that's an extreme version of it, but it's the idea that if we can get you to practice this meditation to deal with your migraine headache, you may be enlightened and you will promote peace and help bring about the new age. So there can be an agenda, not that everybody's promoting these things for that reason, but there are those that specifically have written about it and were the original movers and shakers in trying to get these things into the culture that had exactly that idea. So worldview thinking is important for many reasons, and it helps to be able to discern, okay, why, the larger context of something that's being promoted, to ask these bigger questions. What do you base that on? How is it that if you lay your hand over my head, I'm going to get well? And ultimately, it can only be explained in a pantheistic worldview. It can't be explained in a physical, scientific, nor in a Christian, spiritual worldview. Okay, so all of these things then, pantheism then is a big part of our culture. It's something we need to be aware of and discerning about. But to get back to the purpose of this class, which, wow, we just ran out of time. But I'm going to define pantheism for you, and then we will look at the 3 problems with it next week. But pantheism is the belief that God is impersonal consciousness. In other words, they believe, they would agree with theists or with Christians that God is infinite. God is alive, and God is conscious. So to that point, they're with us. But from there, they completely diverge. They deny that God has personal attributes, morality, relationships. God rather just is a sea of being without attributes. So the way that they would describe God, and this is the strict adherence, there's a lot of watering down and mixture of other worldviews that goes on. But the strict adherence of Advaita Vedanta philosophy, which is the most thought through formulation of pantheism and the most consistent, would say that the only way you can really describe God is Sat Chit Ananda, which are Sanskrit terms meaning being, in other words, God is, awareness. God is composed of pure awareness or consciousness, that is God's nature, and bliss. God experiences eternal bliss as a result of this pure awareness. So that is the view of God that they hold, and it runs into the problems of how did the universe get here? How is it that we see multiplicity within the universe if everything is one? And what about human nature? Can we live consistently with this belief? Or do we have to deny our own nature to follow this belief? All of those things I'll develop next week.
Where does Scientology fit in that? Isn't that the idea of controlling your own universe?
Scientology, what you're going to find with a lot of religious cults is that they mix and match. They borrow from different beliefs. So Scientology has accepted the idea of reincarnation, which is properly a pantheistic belief. But if I was going to categorize Scientology, I would categorize it back in the first worldview we looked at, which is polytheism, because they don't believe in one God. They believe in a multiple, numerous, pantheon of gods, which are called Thetans, Thetans. And so these Thetans have existed forever, and they collectively came up with a plan to create the MEST, M-E-S-T, matter, energy, space-time continuum, and then immerse themselves into it as souls so that they could go through this long journey of incarnation, reincarnation from a higher, one form of life to another, until eventually they would become human beings, still not remembering what they really are or why they're in this world. And they had to wait until a science fiction writer by the name of L. Ron Hubbard, who had written a book called Dianetics, which was a mental health approach, which flopped when he was promoting it as a mental health approach, but then he decided to turn it into a religion. And he came up with the whole theory that we have these engrams that are planted in our brains that cause us to forget our true identity as Thetans. But through Scientology auditing, using an e-meter to measure your galvanic skin resistance, that they can probe back to your past traumatic events that are blocking you from remembering your true identity as a Thetan, and not only going back through past experiences in this life, but eventually back through previous incarnations, all the way back to when you were a clam struggling to get out of the water, and you kept getting washed back, and this water was dripping down your face, and that's why you're crying right now. You're remembering that experience of being washed back by the water, And then all of a sudden, when you go back and resolve through, thousands and thousands of dollars of Scientology auditing to help you resolve all these past traumas, then eventually, boom, you become clear, what they call clear, and you realize that you remember that you are a Thetan, you know that you're a Thetan, you know that you put this whole thing in motion until you would reach this moment of becoming clear, and now you become an OT. They've got all kinds of code words and jargon. And an OT is an operating Thetan. We're all Thetans, but most of us don't know it, and so we're defeated in life. But once you're clear and you realize that you're a Thetan, you're now an OT, an operating Thetan, and you have unlimited power. So you can accomplish whatever you want to through this realized, actualized power as a Thetan.
Key concept is all of what you're talking about is deception.
Yes.
I mean that's what it's all about. And you can go right to Hollywood with the Matrix and Luke Skywalker, and then you name it. It's all about deception.
Right, and this process of deception is marching on, and the movie Avatar is very much promoting pantheism. That doesn't mean it doesn't show wonderful technique and drama and tell an entertaining story, but be aware and discerning of the fact that this is yet another. I mean, I'm old enough to have seen the first Star Wars when it came out in the theater, and I'm very old enough to have done that. And I saw the effect that had on the culture. All these things, that was pure pantheism. The force, the good side, the dark side of the force, it's all one force. God is an impersonal force that you can manipulate for good or for evil, And that idea got a lot of traction in the culture because that movie was so popular. People think it's first an entertainment science fiction world. Then they realize there's actually people who believe and use this and claim that they get results and go, wow, that's exciting. That's a lot better than atheism. It's a lot more exciting and appealing. And that process has been continuing all along. Hollywood plays a real role in promoting these, as well as popular fiction. The Celestine prophecy and all the things that have been popular. And by the way, the next issue of the Christian Research Journal, the cover article, not the very next, because the next one has just come out, so it is the next one because the current one is being mailed out right now. But the next one in 2 months, the cover article will be on Avatar. And we have a Hollywood screenwriter who's written screenplays for movies that have been published, who's also a Christian apologist and cultural critic, who is one of our contributing writers by the name of Brian Godawa. And he's written a very insightful and helpful critique of Avatar that'll be in the next issue. www.equip.org to subscribe to the Christian Research Journal. Yes, Jim?
Well, I was just thinking of biblically as far as self-reformation when you have a void in your life, you're open to many things. But self-reformation, where the Lord talked about, you know, when you try to reform yourself, the state later on is worse than the beginning, because when you leave yourself open, there's all kinds of things that can come in and deceive you, like Mark was saying.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
Christian Research what?
It's Christian Research Journal is the name of the publication, and our website. I've been the editor of that for 30 years this summer, and it's www.equip.org is how you can access, read more about it, and subscribe.